Hi, everybody. I'm Allison Freyberg, and welcome to the Writing Lounge. Today, we're going to be focusing on slides, how to captivate your audience and clarify your message. So let's dive in, shall we? For those of you who are new to the Writing Lounge, I'm Allison Freyberg. I'm a professor of communication and cultural studies in the School of Business and Society at the University of Redlands. You can read about me here. You can reach me at the address below, and then there's some QR codes for the programs I work with, including the Writing Lounge. So I invite you to head on over there and see what's coming up. Today, though, we're going to be doing presentation slide design. And actually, when I'm hearing from students and presenters and professionals who do presentations, these are the kinds of things I usually hear. Number one, my slides are usually notes of what I say in my presentation. This is probably the most common thing that happens, and we're going to talk about that and why that's a problem. Number two, I like to get all my data on my slides so the audience can see everything. And that's a gesture that's generous, but it ends up just confusing the reader, confusing your audience member. Number three, I've never really thought much about designing slides, and I don't have time anyway. I hear this a lot. We don't have time to design slides, just get some slides up. It's the presentation that matters, and I believe that. I mean, presentations are ultimately a relationship between you as the presenter and your audience. But we don't want to let slides get in the way of that. We want to help them work for you. And number four, I've seen amazing slides, but I don't know how to create them. And we're going to work on some issues there as well. Okay, so here's what we're looking at today. We're going to look at story making, storytelling, arranging items, background, colors, text, images, how to display data, and how to work with movement and not work with movement on your slides. But I want to start off with some guiding concepts for slide design. And I think the most important one is this, and it relates to number one in the What Rings True slide. Your slides are for your audience. They're not for you. So often we create slides as 21st century index cards, right? When we used to look at index cards and have our notes on them. Well, now we have our notes on slides, and that is not good slide design because that has nothing to do with your audience. Okay, if your notes are there for you, they're not there for your audience. I'd invite you to think of a slide as an idea that you're trying to communicate, that you want your audience to get. What are the elements that are necessary for your audience to get your idea? Oh, and about that audience, they can listen to you or read your slide, but they can't do both. And I'll tell you right now, the slide always wins. So you don't want to be in a situation where you're battling your slide for your audience's attention. So we're going to work on how to avoid that. And I'll tell you as well that a great slide never won a room, but a really bad slide deck can lose one very fast. Let's not do that. And there are so many app options now. Obviously, there's PowerPoint. There's Canva, which actually does a lot of the design for you. Very easy program, easy application to use, mobile ready. And then there's Prezi, which is an interesting app because it really favors narrative, but it also puts all your elements on one slide, and then you zoom in and out of areas of that slide to release the story, if you will, or reveal the story. There's Google Slides, of course. There's so many apps you can use. No matter what app you choose, I really do recommend picking up this book by Nancy Duarte. It's Slideology. It's actually a few years old now, but the design principles are really there, and they are principles that will last. So I recommend it. A lot of the ideas from This presentation, a lot of the tips here are coming from the Duarte book, and I'll signal when those are the case. For me, most important thing is the story you're building. Think about what good stories have and why we like them so much. You know what? There's usually a journey. Where are we? Where are we going to go? How will we get there? And these, if you're telling an organizational story or a story of your proposal or a story of your evaluation or a story of a report, you want to invite people along this journey. Stories have heroes and villains. Who should we be rooting for? Where's the obstacle? For organizational problems, there's always going to be an obstacle. Let's identify it and move through this journey together to get past it. There's conflict in any story, and it's okay to identify it in a presentation to build that sense of conflict in, because then you can help resolve it. And finally, good stories usually have a surprise. Is there an unexpected turn? Where can you draw attention to it? All that good stuff that can help you draw your audience in. A journey, heroes and villains, conflict and surprise. Let's use these elements. Now look at this. This is a photograph I made when I was in Trieste, Italy, and I'm walking down from a castle, and I saw this person walking, and I started wondering, well, where are they going? Where are they coming from? What are they carrying? What's keeping them up at night? What are they moving towards? I wanted to know. And that's what story does. Story creates interest, creates curiosity, creates empathy. Let's use that. When you are trying to storyboard, think of a beginning, a middle, and an end. How many times have we simply just filled up slides until we had all the information out and then we ended? And there's no momentum, there's no narrative, there's no journey, there's no beginning, middle, and end. Try to think about this when you're thinking about putting together the story of your presentation. I think that people should know where they are in your story. You want to know, you have a sense of which room you're in, where are you, what's going on. You'll notice that in this presentation, you'll see on the right-hand side, there's a bar that actually helps you figure out where you are in our story. I think each slide should tell a tiny story. Now, we're so used to slides having tons of words, tons of text on them. And sometimes people go, when they're trying to reduce the words, they go the whole other way and there's just a random word or a random photo, and that means nothing to anybody. So if you have too many words, your audience is just reading the words on the slide. If you have too few words, the slide isn't doing anything for your audience. So I think a slide should tell a tiny story. There should be a directive. There should be probably a noun and a verb that tells people who's doing what. In this case, my little story is each slide should tell a tiny story. And I'll try to highlight these as we go through. Nancy Duarte says when you're trying to tell your story, she says that all good presentations, like all good stories, convey and resolve some kind of conflict or imbalance. The sense of discord is what makes audiences care enough to get involved. And one technique she recommends is amplifying the gap between what is and what could be. Let's look at an example here. Now, I'm using an example for the courses I teach, and one of the courses I teach is our travel program, our study away, study abroad, where we go on 10-day travel courses and meet and visit businesses every day. Now, I want to coax people over to wanting to go. I want to persuade them. So if we think about what is, hey, there's an international business course. The International Business Course provides a textbook history of successful companies and the practices employed. Accurate? I don't want people to take that course. I want people to take my travel course, which substitutes for that International Business Course. So what I did there was I made the description of the course as dull as possible. I used Times New Roman font. I made it too small to really see on mobile devices. And I use really bland words, vague, abstract words that don't really let anyone see or imagine what they'll experience. So, international business, successful companies, practices employed, very dull. And then I used words like textbook and history. I mean, these are not words that are there to grab people's attention. They're not there to persuade. So, I rewrote it this way. On my Redlands study abroad, I'm going to network with entrepreneurs in Croatia, visit blockchain startups in Slovenia, and shadow a wine exporter in Italy. That's what could be, right? And what have I done here? I've used very concrete nouns and very active verbs. I'm going to network, I'm going to shadow. And I've taken my concrete nouns and I've put them in a very poppy red font. And I've also used a more interesting font. And I've even set it off on the little square so it pops off the page more. And finally, what I've done to entice people over to what could be is I've used this little Game of Thrones kind of photograph here where someone's actually jumping from what is over to what could be. So everything in this slide is coaxing you over to that right-hand side with the study abroad. Okay, so I've designed the slide in a way that amplifies the gap between what is and what could be. Now, we're going to work on arranging elements on a slide. One idea per slide. One idea per slide. If you have 5 ideas on a slide, sure, you have fewer slides and everybody can see your ideas, but they're going to be lost in the ideas and they won't be listening to you. And they won't know how to prioritize those ideas. Again, it just turns into a bunch of notes. One idea per slide. Give your audience a chance to understand that idea. And this is from Duarte. People should get your slide in 3 seconds. Now, that's not an absolute, but you get the spirit of it here. They should get your slides quickly so that then they can start listening to you. There are going to be occasional exceptions where you're really lingering on a slide, but those are occasional and rare. People should get your idea, get your slide in 3 seconds, and then turn to you for explanation. And that's where you're creating a stronger relationship with your audience. You can use contrast to guide people to your point. And one of the themes that you're going to hear throughout this webinar is that you want to guide your audience's eyes towards what you want them to see on the slide. Because if they start wandering all over your slide, they're not listening to you. So Duarte recommends these ways to guide people's eyes using contrast. So you can have something on the page be a different size than the other ones, something on the slide being a different shape. So their eye is drawn, in this case, to the triangle. Something in the column, you're going to change the shade, even if you're all in that kind of maroon category, you're going to change the shade and the audience member's eyes are going to be drawn to that different shade. What you'll notice that I do is I tend to use color. I tend to use a pop color to draw your attention to a specific area of the slide. You can also uh, work on location, change the location of the item from where you expect it to be and put it somewhere else, and people's eyes will be drawn there. So these are all ways to draw contrast and help people see what you want them to see. I also think you can create flow for readers' eyes. Show them how to read the slide if you're going from place to place in a slide. Now, in English, we read from left to right and from top to bottom. So what I did was I said, I wrote a tiny story, create flow for readers' eyes, using that top to bottom, left to right flow. And then I used a background photo of the beach and all those rivulets and the waters flowing. And then I used a contrast color. I flipped the colors on the word flow. So even if you had 3 seconds, 1 second to get this slide, you would know that the word flow is important. Hierarchy builds relationships. In slides, I don't think so much in life. But when you think about it, what's most important on your slide should probably be in the largest font, because the signals you're sending it are, if it's larger, it's more important. If it's smaller, it's less important. So remember that as you're building your titles, your headings, whatever you're building on the slide. You can use a grid system to compose your slide as well. Instead of just plopping what you want in the middle of your slide, what you can do is use this grid system. You see, it's a basic principle from photography, the rule of thirds, where you are dividing your slide, in this case, into about 9 squares. And you'll notice that when you're editing a photo on your phone, this grid appears as well. And the trick here that makes it really nice to read for composition is that you're going to try to put elements at the intersections of those lines. Okay, so top left is the speaker's head. That's what I did here. Bottom left is the speaker's shoulder. Bottom right is the speaker's microphone, all elements that are contributing to the message of the slide. And then what I did for the top right, there was nothing there. So I figured that's a good spot to tell my tiny story. In this case, my tiny story is use a grid system to compose slide. And I put it at that intersection, and then everything's all balanced in the slide. I did a little shadow on that font. I made the font really big. I made it super white so it'll pop, and it pops out nicely from the actual background photograph. So try that using that rule of thirds to compose your slide. Embrace space. Don't be afraid to have very little on a slide. It still has to be a tiny story, but in this case, if my message is to embrace space, it's kind of nice to have a slide that actually does that and demonstrates it. So uh, rather than, I mean, the font is big enough for everyone to see, but it doesn't have to fill the whole slide. You can guide someone's eyes right to the tiny story and just let the space breathe. All right, let's go over some backgrounds, colors, and text. Try to think of backgrounds as a surface, like a table, okay? Now, when you're setting the table, you're setting it for people, right? And how often have we gone to holiday dinners and there's a huge centerpiece on that table? And no one can see each other, and you're ducking your head all over the place just trying to have a conversation. That is not a good use of surface. And in the same way that if you're pulling out templates from PowerPoint that use up half the surface of the slide, that's not doing anything, in the same way that that centerpiece really isn't doing anything to make a good conversation at the meal. So be mindful of what you're actually placing on that surface and make sure it's intentional. Choose a color palette. Now, I've used Redlands, official Redlands colors here, and there's a blue, there's a creamy color, a white, a maroon, and a gray. And I tend to use my organization's color scheme, color patterns. Marketing likes it when I do that. Marketing is not so happy when I use my big orange contrast pop color, but I find that when I'm actually working in virtual webinars or virtual classrooms, the orange pop really helps guide people's eyes, and that's the most important thing for me. Try to get comfortable with the color wheel. I mean, if you're using your organization's colors and you're choosing a pop color to work from that, make sure it works. It's a complementary color with that pop color. And if you're designing your own color palette, then try to pay attention to the ideas in this color wheel. For example, if you're using purple, that complements well and contrasts well with yellow. Red and green are good complementaries. And you'll notice what I used is blue and orange. The university uses a lot of blue, and so I chose an orange-based color for my pop color. So have a look, just look up color wheels and see what gets recommended. Choose fonts that eyes like. Okay, make sure everything's big enough. We're all in meetings, we're all watching presentations on mobile, on tablets, on laptops, on small screens. So you have to make sure that your font is large enough. First of all, I don't think we should be using fonts that are smaller probably than 30-point font these days so people can see your slide. And I also think it's nice to use a sans serif font if you're telling a tiny story because the sans serif fonts are the ones without the little tails on them. And that's good for reading smaller amount of text. And here's the big one. Banish bullet points. I know, right? This is a hard one because it's our default and we just use a lot of bullet points. And we do that when we're using our slides as simply notes for ourselves. Okay, if you notice you're using a lot of bullet points, then you're not really creating slides for your audience. All right, images and movement. Embrace photography. So clip art and all, you know, just get rid of that. You can find great public domain, non-copyright, high-resolution photographs at Unsplash, and you can also find it at pexels.com. So have a look there for some really great photography that can help move along your message in your presentations. Get friendly with icons too. Now, PowerPoint has the icons built in, and so does Canva. But if you need icons, you can find them for free at Icon Finder. And then I also highly recommend the Noun Project, which focuses on inclusivity. So you can find some great icons there that are more representative of the people we see in the world. And so I recommend them both very highly. And then build a photo and icon library. I have folders on my hard drive that I've downloaded photos and icons that I know what I tend to use. I know what my work tends to be about. So I try to create those libraries so I can go quickly grab a photograph or an icon that I need, and I'm not on Unsplash all day looking at pretty photographs. Animation. We are tempted to animate, aren't we? But please have it be intentional for you. If you're going to animate, know why you're choosing to do so. Maybe you're trying to signal a change in a relationship between elements. Maybe you're trying to signal a direction, guiding people's eyes a certain way. Maybe you're trying to visualize a transition in time, so something over time, or how something has grown or reduced. And finally, I use this one a lot. It's to control your eye movement. For example, I have 4 reasons on this slide, but I didn't want to uh, have you see that all at once, because then you're reading through it all. It takes more than 3 seconds. Then you're not hearing what I'm saying, and you're just working on. You get it? So what I did was I released each reason in animation, and then you're able to see each one in the 3 minutes. In the 3 seconds, sorry. You don't want 3 minutes. Okay, displaying data. This is probably where we all have trouble, right? And I would recommend letting these questions guide your decisions about visualizing data. Ask yourself, what do you want people to notice when you're putting data on a slide? What relationship do you want people to see between the elements, between the data? And what trend do you want to make visible? Ask yourself these questions. If you don't have the answer to these questions, you're not ready to put data on a slide, because the answer to these questions will guide how you visualize that data. I think you should try to visualize data takeaways rather than putting all the data on a slide. So for example, here's one I made. 45% of the US workforce will use co-working spaces by 2025. I just made that up. But if it were actually data that I found, I visualized the takeaway. That's what I want people to remember. They're going to read that, they're going to have questions, and then they're going to start listening to me explain how I arrived at that information. Okay, so if you can visualize the takeaways, you control what people see, and then you ask them implicitly to listen to you to see how you got there. What was the journey that got to 45%? Use infographics, right? Canva has a really nice feature where you can import some Excel data and convert it into easy infographics. And use the right tool. If you're going to use pie and donut charts, those are really helpful to show large differences. I'm looking at that big slice of the pie there, right? That's what my eye is drawn to. And if you have a pie where it has 8 slices and they're kind of all the same size, you're not helping anyone understand anything. So if you want to show a large difference, maybe a donut chart is really helpful for you. Bar charts can help show more precision. But here's what I want to focus on. You have your background. That's the chart you're choosing, right? A spider chart, a line graph, a donut chart, pie chart, bar charts, whatever you're using. That's your background. And then you provide the data that fills it. But here's the thing that we don't remember to do. What are we trying to emphasize? How are we going to draw people's eyes towards what we want them to see? Because if you just put up a big slide of data and don't tell people where to look, don't guide people where to look, they're going to be all over the place and they're not going to be listening to you, and they're going to crawl down holes and just find all sorts of stuff and start thinking about their own ideas, and they've stopped listening to you, and you don't want that to happen. So here's a few simple examples. And none of this, I just made up generic little samples, but in each case, you're drawn to the orange because I've used color to help guide you to what I want you to see. So for that top left one, you're going to look at that orange bar. For the top right, you're looking at that orange slice of that pie. For the bottom left, you tend to be looking at the orange line. And if you feel the need to put a whole table up there, please highlight what you want us to look at. In this case, I've highlighted quarter two. So make sure you're guiding people's eyes whenever you put data up there. Graphs or charts, tables, whatever you're putting up there, show us what to look at. Don't just tell us what to look at. And that brings us to the end of our presentation slide design webinar. We've looked at all sorts of design concepts: story, arranging items, background, colors, text, images, movement, and data. And here's some resources for you. Of course, the Duarte Slideology, another great book for the whole field of presentations, not just slide design, would be her HBR Guide to Persuasive Presentations. Gar Reynolds' Presentation Zen is a standard in the field. And then if you're really working with data, I recommend uh, the last two books, Storytelling with Data and Good Charts. Again, the QR code for the Writing Lounge is right there, so go ahead and grab that. And if you're interested in actually getting these slides, just contact me. You can contact me at the Writing Lounge, and I'll send them on over to you, okay? Thanks for coming today, and I hope to see you again.